Your Partner in Success Radio is a free business podcast with host Denise Griffitts. It's all about great stories, conversation, and context to help you move your business and life forward with actionable tips and advice from her guest experts. To listen and subscribe, just find us on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you consume your podcasts.
Good morning and welcome back to Your Partner in Success Radio. I am your host, Denise Griffitts, and today's guests are two visionary leaders who believe America's greatest days are still ahead. Paul Johnson is a former mayor of Phoenix, a business innovator, and the host of the Optimistic American podcast. He's known for championing individual empowerment, optimism, and the enduring strength of American values. And joining him is Larry Aldrich. He is an accomplished attorney, a business leader, and a civic advocate whose career spans from federal antitrust prosecutor to CEO of major media and healthcare organizations. And together they co-authored What's Right with America and How We Can Keep It That Way, a book that explores the core traits, courage, imagination, grit, generosity, and optimism that have defined America's success, and it offers a hopeful roadmap for the future. And I'm especially excited to, sounded like my sister there, especially, it used to drive me crazy when she did that. We're especially excited to be broadcasting this conversation on America's birthday, July 4th, Independence Day. It's the perfect occasion to reflect on what's right with our country and how we can all keep the American spirit alive. So get ready for an inspiring discussion about leadership, resilience, and the power of optimism in shaping our nation's next chapter. Paul, Larry, before we dive into our conversation, could each of you share with our audience a bit about your backgrounds?
Sure. I'll start that. I'm in business. I own a company called Redirect Health. I also have I have 9 brothers and sisters. My dad and his brother hitchhiked to Arizona when they were like 7 and 11 years old from Pennsylvania. Their mother had passed away, and they came out here, shined shoes, and worked kind of out in the trenches. They went into construction work, and both of them bought houses on the same street. Both had 9 kids. So we have like this big, huge family. We get together quite a bit. I have now somewhere near myself 14 grandchildren, 3 of my own kids. I served as mayor of Phoenix. I was elected mayor when I was 29 years old. I was on the city council before that. And I've also been involved in 3 presidential races and done different gigs for the State Department, been able to travel all the world and understand that. And I guess I left all of it with an unabiding belief, not only in who we are, but in an incredible optimism about our future.
I agree with you. How about you, Larry?
I'm happy to give you a little more background. First, I want to thank you for having us, Denise, and a shout out to your listeners on this Independence Day of celebration. I guess we officially enter our semi-quincentennial year, which is actually, I learned from Ken Burns, that that's actually what some people will call it, a sesquicentennial. It's a semi-quincentennial, our 250th year, a year from now. And that's pretty stunning. A lot of what we talk about is how America has been through some tough times and has come out the other side, in part because we've been around a fairly long time. So just a little brief background. You mentioned being in the antitrust business. I actually went to a school to become a aerospace engineer. The year before I went to Georgia Tech, I saw the moon landing, and it just inspired me to become a civil engineer. While I was at Tech, I was inspired by a lawyer who was a showman, and I said, I want to be just like him. I just want to go and talk a lot. So I became a litigator, an antitrust prosecutor, and in that capacity, actually joined a company I had investigated after it closed, Gannett, the publisher at that time of maybe the largest publisher of newspapers in the country. And both law and the media business underscore for me the importance of what makes America great, our Constitution, and the powers of our First Amendment to improve people's lives. And that's one reason it'll happen. It's great to also be here on July 4th, because I think we will get a little bit into the one BBB, one beautiful bill that was passed yesterday that the president will sign today. And, we have some perspectives on the impacts of that bill about America. So I think we'll spend a little time on that.
I would love to hear it. I took some time yesterday. I would race from my office and race to the living room. I very rarely have the TV on, and I don't watch legacy news, just so you know. But I was watching Newsmax, and I was going to, I kept saying, is it going to pass? Is it going to pass? Oh, it passed. And then I could go calm down a little bit. But I think this is just my personal thinking that we don't know what's going to happen. We have to wait and see. But, you can't predict any of it really, although we want to. I mean, that's our natural bent. I think, oh, this is going to be awful. This is going to be great. We have to wait and see. But I wanted to thank you both for sending me your book. I've had it for a while now. You sent it before it was actually available on Amazon. And I have read it at least 3 times. It's that important. And I'm going to read to the audience very quickly before I get out of your way, because I know you have a lot to share. From the book description, it's regardless of what you see on the nightly news or hear from politicians, America is the greatest superpower in history. And those who live here will experience a future of fantastic abundance for the remainder of the century and beyond. Is America's future as bright as its past? What's Right with America argues that not only is the answer a resounding yes, but the nation's most incredible days are yet to come. Tell me about that.
Okay, so, well, first, let me say this. Larry was a publisher of a newspaper. I was the mayor of the city of Phoenix. Both of us understand there are problems and challenges in the country. And being an optimist doesn't mean that you ignore the problems. That's not what it means. It's just we believe that the people who are going to solve the big problems in this country are the people who believe that you can solve them. But that our fear is that our pessimism is getting out of hand. And in fact, pessimism is a very, very profitable business. It's very profitable for politicians to utilize it. It's also very profitable for the media to use it. If I know whether you're a conservative or a liberal, I know there are about 5 buttons that I can push that I can terrify you by. And once I engage that amygdala, it's going to overpower the rational part of your brain called the neocortex. Well, if you look at what we're hearing from our politicians today, by the way, on both sides, the right and the left, you'll hear these tales being spun of how bad it is, how our industry's been destroyed, how jobs have left us, how the rest of the world's taken advantage of us, or how the wealthy have taken advantage of us. And here's what our book basically does. It says, start with the data. Take a look at what the data says, because the data tells you something quite different. There's just no doubt about this. There's nothing like the United States in the history of mankind. No one has done more to promote human progress than we have. And from our standpoint, understanding that data becomes important so that you can begin to gain agency. What we know is that if you're an entrepreneur, one of the single most important things is you have to have faith in the future. You're not going to want to invest. Well, you're spending your time watching the nightly news or listening to partisan politicians, your view may become, and it's almost undoubted that it will become, fear about where we're going. And what we try to do in the book is to allay that and then to try and explain how that happened. How did we accomplish this great prosperity? What were the driving forces that made that happen? So we know what it is that we need to hang on to ensure that we can be successful in the future.
It's a great book. When I say I've read it 3 times, I'm not kidding. And I have hundreds of books in this room. All of them were gifted to me by authors, and yours is in pride of pace. I can grab it at any moment, at any day. It's at the top shelf. It's an important book.
Yeah, well, thank you. Larry,
let me start a little bit in a foundational way. Paul is the past politician and a great communicator and will really tug on the emotions. And I being a litigator, I had to tug on emotions periodically too, but the lawyer kind of does the work and does the homework and does the detail. And so, we start and we spend a lot of time in the book talking about the foundations of America, the founders of America. And what they built was a constitution, which is really a set of laws for our country. One of the things that people forget, especially Denise, for your listeners and on your podcast of your partner in success, successful businesses, large or small, are not successful unless they can make the math work. Unless they can deliver a return, a profit over time, they will be unsuccessful. That is the foundation for businesses in America. And the foundation of the Constitution created that framework where businesses and others could be successful. But what the Constitution truly did, and what we have forgotten, certainly in the 21st century, but probably in the 20th century, is the Constitution created a federal government that was limited in scope. The intention was the most powerful organization in the country were the people of the United States. The second most powerful entity in the United States were the states. The 50 states, back then 13 colonies/states, that were formed way before the federal government was formed. So they had the second level of power. And the federal government is limited in its scope by the terms of the Constitution. We have flipped that on its head so that everyone, Republican or Democrat, thinks the Constitution, the federal government, is the most powerful. I do think the Supreme Court, especially when Justice Scalia was still alive, was really in a rotation to get us back to this notion of federalism, which is a balanced power among the people, the states, and the country. And as we look, and we'll get into the details of the bill, and I agree with what you said earlier, Denise, we have to wait and see how it plays out. What we don't have to wait for is whether it's Democrats or Republicans, they all will spend way too much money. They all will be in deficit, and it may depend on what they want to drive, whether it's defense or whether it's social programs or on and on and on. They are spending your money, my money, Paul's money. It's not their money. If it were our money, we would spend it more wisely. So the government will not, and we as the people are going to have to rise up and figure out how to do it. The government has no ability to restrain themselves. And the bill yesterday and today is the most recent example. We're going to add somewhere between $3 and $5 trillion to a breathtakingly high debt. That's going to create damage for the country. It's going to create damage for people, create damages for business. And we just got to get our arms around it. It's not, criticizing the bill yesterday anymore. They criticize what Biden did under his term, but they keep spending too much money. And we need in America to say, stop it.
We make it too easy for them. We don't. Listen, I'll be honest with you. I would like to see some of these politicians. Remember when we used to tar and feather people? I'd like to see that brought back. Okay, keep going. I'm sorry.
The word.
Well, I'll finish that by saying, we should just, if they can't spend our taxpayer money properly, and that obviously is a discussion and a consensus building that has to be achieved, then we need to vote them out and put in people who actually can. And we have some. We're so wonderful, so powerful, as Paul stated, but we have got to fix the spending problem sooner rather than later.
And here's what I would say. I do want to go back to spend a little more time on what Larry had spoken about early on, which were the foundations. But before I do, Larry and I did point out two of the biggest risks that exist to the United States. And again, we have a fundamental belief that if you look at the economics of the United States, if you look at where we are with the world's reserve currency, if you take a look at what we're doing in terms of all the other G7 nations, we're unparalleled. The amount of growth that we've had, we talk a lot about the other G7 nations or the other countries somewhat taking advantage of us. Well, here's a statistical fact. The 1990s, almost every G7 nation was equal. We were all about the same. Today, the United States on a GDP per person is double any other G7 nation. In fact, Mississippi, which is our lowest state in GDP per person, is higher than any other G7 nation with the exception of Germany and Canada. But the two big challenges and risks that we have, number one, we have to make certain that we do not spend ourselves into oblivion. The deficits that we have today, there's a very good book that I recommend written by Ray Dalio, where he talks about we can maintain our federal debts being at 3% of GDP because we have about a 3% growth rate. So you're going to have a deficit, 3% is acceptable. For about the last 8 years, we've been running at about 7%. He points out that that takes us in 10 years, if interest rates stay between 5 and 7%, to almost 50% of our budget being spent in debt service. It's not sustainable. And both sides have been a contributor, and we've got to get a hold of it. The second issue that we said that was important is we have to learn to be nice to one another. We have.
You would think, wouldn't you? I mean, honestly.
We have to be respectful of the fact that both sides bring something to the table. Both sides bring a benefit. And that has to be done within some constraints. Now, we believe, we took a pretty solid look at a lot of other authors who are great authors who are talking about what made the United States great. And Larry pointed this out to a degree, but you'll hear from like Peter Zion, who we've read his books. They're good books. He likes to talk about the geography of the United States, the fact that we have an ocean on both sides. Canada and Mexico are only real borders. And he points out how in other countries, they just simply don't have those benefits. That Fortress America is a real selling point for us. Some people talk about the riverways, the fact that we could transport goods so cheaply on riverways went throughout the United States, that was a benefit. That we're so large with so many natural resources. Now, all those things are beneficial. Our country has done a great many good things, great things, right? We built dams and bridges and roadways. We even put a man on the moon. But the single greatest thing our country ever did was that it put the individual over itself, meaning that it empowered the individual. And of course, that evolved over time. But from the very beginning, those words, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, led to civil rights, equal rights, human rights, property rights, free markets, free trade, free elections. And those things are all an empowerment to the individual. So think about the big problems that we have today. There's some big problems. I'll give you a couple. Curing cancer, extending human life, trying to get rid of the amount of people who die based upon traffic accidents or DWIs. And then think about who is most likely to solve those problems. Is it government or is it individuals and entrepreneurs? I mean, curing cancer and extending human life, landing somebody on the moon, for that matter, the idea that we may come up with a driverless car that completely wipes out the amount of traffic deaths that are on our roadways. Those are all private sector endeavors that are massive game changers. By empowering individuals 2.5 centuries ago, we created this additional power that goes way beyond the government. And in fact, oftentimes government competes with it. It competes with it by taking up too much money, which not only takes more capital out of the marketplace, but it also raises interest rates. They can overregulate it. Ensuring that those powers that are left to the individuals are more intact are the ways that we're going to ensure that we have a very, very prosperous nation for many years to come, certainly throughout the rest of this century.
Larry, what are your thoughts? And listen, I'll tell you, Paul, I agree with everything you just said. Larry, what are your thoughts?
I want to kind of maybe recenter the conversation, probably the conversation in my brain. We provided the eat your spinach to start the conversation, some of the challenges in America. But as we recenter it back towards the optimism, pretty much what Paul talked about, it is we have in place all the structure and all the ability to be successful and to go through challenging times. We're always going to have challenging times. We've gone through the Civil War and the Depression and, Vietnam War, make the list. It's very long. We've come out the other side very successfully. So pretty much, we are long on and incredibly respectful for the competence of the founders, who clearly didn't envision the America of today, but envisioned how a structure built in the Constitution would enable a successful American. And that structure really starts with a simple premise that the power of the individual is bigger than anything else. The Constitution protects the power of individuals as kind of its core tenet. And those individuals might be in a minority position. So the Constitution protects minority rights. Constitution protects our freedom of speech. The Constitution protects our right to lobby our legislators for bills. It protects our right to protest. And in the case of civil rights and human rights, it protects those individuals in their civil and human rights. But it's that focus on individuals that also enables business, that enables an individual to decide where and when he or she decides to enter into a business, whatever business they choose to go into, subject to some regulation for safety of other people. But that structure and that focus on the power and rights and freedoms of individuals was pretty novel in the 18th century. May not be as novel today, but we were first in line to do that. And that has enabled everything else.
It was fun writing this with Larry because there were areas that we had disagreements on. He would write a chapter, I would write a chapter. We would kind of go back and forth on it. I learned a lot from writing this with Larry. Larry's a great teacher, all kind of in himself. He spent a lot of time focused on the Constitution. But, I came away with a renewed engagement in some ideals that I've had for a long time in writing this book. And the first one is I do believe in American exceptionalism. I do believe that there are universal values. I want to talk about those universal values for a moment because I think they play to what Larry was just saying. If you think about a collective nation versus a individual nation, oh, you know what?
I can hear that.
So I'll come back to mine in a minute. He's right at my door. Sorry about that.
Oh, is that what that is? And I was
pick it up from there, Denise.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask about unity in America. If you listen to headlines, which I really try not to do, I do, I'm very aware of what's going on in the world and in America, but I don't really pay attention to headlines because to me, they're, like you said earlier, they are written as division. They really are. So I don't believe that Americans are not united. I think we are more united than divided. So what shared values or experiences bring us together? Even right now, everybody seems to be mad at each other.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Denise. I mean, we point out in the book, as you recall, that we have somewhat had been captured by the anger on both the left and the right, the extreme views, the hatred. As Paul pointed out, we got to get past that, but it's not a big part of America. Arguably, 10% on the left, 10% on the right are angry and intense, and they get the media to pay attention to them. The rest of us is 75 to 80% in the middle, would like them simply to stop yelling. We might disagree with our neighbor who has a different political perspective. They're still our neighbor. We know how in families, unless there's, some element of mental illness, we know how to disagree without being ugly. And we know how to hopefully battle, and maybe I drive my family nuts because I'm the lawyer and I'll play the argument game and they get sick and tired of it. But the reality is we're able to have those conversations in our families, with our friends, with our neighbors across the community. It only seems to be the politicians that can't have those civil conversations. We elect members of Congress, for example, to work together to achieve consensus on issues that are important. It's, in my view, horrible that any president would try to make decisions for this country by executive order. And, I think it really started under President Obama, where he just was sick and tired of trying to work with the Republicans. So he just went by executive order. And it's just gotten worse. And what happens is the next president comes in of a different party and they blow up that executive order.
They undo it. Right. Don't they need, if these orders need to be codified, if they're going to mean anything?
Absolutely. The founders should be expected that the best way to reach the best decisions was a process of consensus. It's one reason they had checks and balances and separation of powers. By the way, the Constitution makes the most important branch of government. Article 1 of the Constitution is the Congress. The Congress is the number one and most important branch in government. Number 2 is the president, and number 3 is the judiciary, but they're in more or less in balance. Certainly, since the 20th century, where all three have powers. It's one of the tragedies, I think, today to basically give all power from Congress to the president, because that isn't what the founders expected. It frankly isn't good for the president. If the president wants to sustain some big vision, he needs to have that put in legislation, have legislation passed in a semi-bipartisan way, at least a couple of votes from the other party, and then signed into law to sustain itself. And we've gotten to this place where if you got 50 plus one, you'll work very hard to vote in your extreme view that the other party can't tolerate. And in some cases, the other party can't tolerate solely for politics. It might be a good bill for America because the other party proposed it, they oppose it. That's a problem too. So I think we have in place, and we're going to get that back, where, Congress respects that it has the principal job to put forward legislation, arguably better in a bipartisan fashion, and a bill that the president will support because he can veto it if he or she doesn't like the bill. And if it's out of bounds with the Constitution, the judiciary will strike it down. Those balances were built in the Constitution, and they really create a more powerful America for the long term.
Maybe what I'll do is I'm going to take this to an individual standpoint as opposed to from a governmental standpoint, because I clearly believe that we have some divisions there that we should focus on. One of the things that happened to me while I was mayor is I had the Martin Luther King Day. We were trying to get it passed in Arizona, and I brought out Rosa Parks. And I took a bus ride down to City Hall. I had this book there of what had happened in her life. There was this picture of this police officer after she had been arrested being on the bus because she refused to give up the seat in the front. She was taken to jail. There's this police officer booking her in. I'm 6'7". She's like 5'2". So she's this little teeny tiny woman. I might be off on the side, but she still is very short. And he's fingerprinting her. He's got this leather strap across his chest. He has a shirt that's been, that's very starched, a crew cut haircut. And I said to Rosa, I said, wow, there's the wall of oppression right there. She put her finger right in my face. She said, Mayor, don't you do that. She said, that was a young man just doing his job. It's not him that was wrong. It was the law that was wrong. I wept. I mean, it's so powerful to be able to see and to hear people as individuals, as opposed to placing them into a group. And here's what I would say to people listening. Each of us hold some responsibility in this game. I hold responsibility in this game. And when I label someone, when I say, well, if you're a liberal and you say they're a Trump-tard, or you're a Trump person, you say they're a libtard, when you begin to see people based upon them being liberal or conservative, or you don't like them because you call them a neo-fascist or a socialist or whatever name it is that you want to apply, you've begun to put yourself into a bubble. And the bubble is you can't see the person as a human being. If I'm married and I say, oh, my wife, she's such a, and I'm going to stress this, witch with the W, my wife's such a witch. And then she and I get into an argument, I'm going to go back in my head and go, oh, well, she's just a witch. I'm never going to hear her. Now, if you go, well, I'm going to solve that problem by communicating more, that won't work. Not if the label that I put on her is that is objectifying her. I have to see her as a human being that have challenges just like I have. And if we do that with one another, we begin to change it. Now, here's what ideology does, what parties do. First, they're tribal. They begin to create this cognitive dissonance where we have to justify the excesses on our side. So it's now not only our thoughts that we have to justify these excessive groups. And we justify them either by saying they're right or by saying, well, my side, look at how terrible your side is. We all have good and evil inside of us. Every one of us do. I do. What parties allow us to do is to export that evil onto someone else based upon a label, thinking that we're good. Horrible atrocities have happened in mankind's history based upon that very simple notion. Now, if you're not worried about that, worry about this. you'll lose business. You'll lose friends. You'll lose family members. If you want to be patriotic, quit insulting other Americans. And whatever you do, don't give up on the people that you love and that you care about for people you don't even know, politicians who are in these fights at the national level. Play the role that you have to as a citizen, and it's going to make you more powerful, more prosperous, and give you a happier life.
I see you nodding your head, Larry.
Yep, it's well said.
I thought so too. Listen, I live in the deep South, and I was talking with he was a guest many, many years ago. He's from Slovenia. And he said, sometime a couple years after the show, he said, Denise, you want to chat? I said, sure. So we jumped on Zoom, and he immediately went to racism in the South. And I said, hold on. I live in the deep South, and I don't know what you're talking about. I do not experience anything like what you just spoke of. And he was shocked. He said, but it's all over the news. I said, well, there's your problem.
Yeah.
You need to talk to somebody like me who we're fine. We don't have, maybe in some of the, New Orleans, blue cities or, big crowded cities, you might have some problems. But for the most, I just never see it. I never see it, and I'm not looking for it.
Denise, have you ever heard of the victim triangle?
No, I can't say I have.
It's a very powerful tool. I use it inside my companies. And it basically says, okay, in this triangle, there's a victim at the top, there's a persecutor on the side, and then there's a savior on the other side. So the victim, let's just use a domestic issue. Maybe it's a husband, and he believes his wife is always on his back for not working hard enough, making enough money. And his dad maybe is always trying to save him and fix the problem for him, and oftentimes makes it worse. All three of them are victims. All of them, right? The persecutor's a victim because she believes that she's not getting something out of her husband that she wants and that he's not listening to her. The victim's a victim because he believes he's being persecuted. And the savior's a victim because every time he steps in to save his son, the son gets mad at him or he causes a disruption in his son's marriage, whatever it is. And he then begins to believe, I do all this stuff to save my son, and nothing works. Now, the way out of a victim triangle is to see your opportunities. There's no doubt there are some people in society who have been given less and who have more challenges than others. There's no doubt that exists. But if you become a victim, if you allow that to happen, there's no way out, period. You can't get there. One of my favorite stories, and I wish I remembered his name, but he was a jazz player. I think he played the saxophone. And he tells the story about this guy coming in, sitting down with him. He was playing at some little club, and the guy says, hey, I want you to know, I really love the way that you play. He says, but I want you to know I can't stand, and then he uses the N-word. So the saxophone player, who is black, listens to him. And he says, yeah, I want you to know, I've been in the Ku Klux Klan. And he goes, and you really play well. So this jazz player says, oh, wow, that's interesting. He says, so tell me how you grew up. Where'd you grow up? The guy talks about how poor he was and different things that happened. And how did you end up getting in the Ku Klux Klan? The guy tells him the story. He listens to him for an hour. Never once tells him he's wrong or how much he disagrees with him. Week later, this guy comes back and he goes, hey, I spent a lot of time thinking about our conversation. I really liked you. He goes, I want to give you something. And he gave him his hat to the Ku Klux Klan. He says, I quit. It threw me off. I really liked you. I also brought 2 other members. Would you mind talking to them? So the guy talks to them. Sure enough, they give it up. And these guys start coming to his concert. Well, the other members of his band get mad. They're going, hey, you got these Ku Klux Klan members coming in here. And that's not who we want as our audience. And he tells them, he goes, no. I don't gauge my success by what the labels are of the people out of my audience. I gauge them by how many Ku Klux Klan hats I have hanging up in my garage. The point of that story to me is sometimes if we just listen to people that we disagree with, we do more to move the ball than anything else we can do by being judgmental and telling them how they're wrong and how offended we are by what they're thinking. We're not moving the ball. We're making them dig in. But oftentimes, these people need an outlet. They need an ability to express where they're coming from. And my view is, if I want to help other people, quit thinking I'm the only guy who knows all the answers. Quit thinking I'm the smartest guy in the room. And by the way, I can do that too. I've had maritis, right? It's you can get to the point where you do that. But if your real goal is that you don't like these divisions, start with your own accountability. And I have to start with mine. I have to own me.
It's difficult for people to dig in deep like that, though. And I'll tell you, I still do. I will have to sit with myself and shine that white, bright light in my eyes. Not literally, but it's almost like I'm interrogating myself to figure out what is wrong with me today. What's going on? It's uncomfortable. But if you don't do it, if you don't dig and know who you are and how you can show up in the world, you're not, why are you bothering sometimes?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think your story, Denise, from the gentleman from Slovenia.
We're still
It's
friends,
really-
by the way. He's like, I did not know that. Well, of course you didn't. You weren't talking to somebody who lives it.
Right, right. And then, the challenge is, and it's a good example of just a small little data point becomes the fact. So that was his opinion based upon not a small data point, but data points. I was vacationing up in Colorado over the last month, and I heard people say, "Oh, where are you from?" I'm from Scottsdale. Oh, I hear you're running out of water. I said, Durango's running out of water too. But I said, not running out of water. But they had heard our governor at one point put a moratorium on one community, maybe it's two communities, on the far edges of the greater Phoenix area with 5 million people, because we call it a 100-year provable water supply, sustainable water supply. And she put a slight moratorium. That was now perceived by other people that Arizona is, in the near term, running out of water. But the point of both of those is this is what makes it very difficult. I think the stat is somewhere between 8 and 12 minutes a day people spend listening to news. So, and how do they get their news? They get it more from the fear side that we talked about a little earlier, because that kind of cuts through the clutter. And so they hear the negativity and the fear and the anger. And, it's hard for people who are living busy lives, who may be working multiple jobs, raising a family, going to church, doing all the things, to actually spend time thinking about the future. It takes work. It takes time. And so that's the challenge we all have. We all want to be nice to each other. We all want to convince the other person that they're wrong and we're right, but we're not going to go, well, you are, and come up with the appropriate profanity.
That never works, by the way. I've tried to explain to
never,
people. It's like, you have your ideas, I have mine. Let's chat about them. And I bet this happens to both of you a lot. I'll be talking with somebody, not talking at somebody, talking with somebody and listening very, very carefully. And I may not agree with a whole heck of a lot they're talking about. And it's obviously, they're not going to really listen to me. But, and this always happens, might be a week later, might be a year later, I'm like, hang on a second. Okay. There was something in that conversation that now resonates with me. It wasn't wrong. It just wasn't my time to hear it.
Oh, no doubt. And, and again, when we listen to other people, when we're willing to kind of take off that victim hat and try to listen to other people, even if we disagree with them, we can always gain knowledge. Today's the 4th of July, so I find this to be an interesting fact. So on the 4th of July, at the founding of our country, we had two men who completely disagreed with one another. Everybody knows the Hamilton Jefferson disagreement, but there's also a Hamilton-Adams disagreement. Great letters that went back and forth between the two. And both of them...
they didn't like each other very much, did they?
They didn't like each other, right?
Right.
And then when both of them got sick and died, they both died on July 4th, which was Independence Day. And the Adams, they said, sat up in his bed a minute before he died and said, Jefferson lives, right? And no one quite knows exactly what that means, but they both passed away on that day. Here's what I find to be interesting. if you take those two sides and go all the way back in history, here's what you find. Could you imagine this country without both of them? Could
No.
you imagine this country without the Bill of Rights, or without a strong Navy, or without the ability to understand that the central government needed to play a role in paying off its debts? I mean, those are the roles that those men played in that process. Even though they disagreed, we gained from both sides. I would tell you, if you can learn from a liberal and you can learn from a conservative, your company's going to be better. You're going to be stronger. They both have gifts to give. Both of them do. You can gain something from both of them. That doesn't mean you have to buy in hook, line, and sinker. It just means that you can gain from both of them. And in the process of gaining from them, you'll also build a friendship. And those friendships are really what life, in my opinion, is most about. When we get done with this, our hands in a bucket of water, whether that's the business community or our involvement in government, and at some point in time, we pull our hand out of the bucket and there's still a bucket of water there. The real change are the emotional connections that we make to other people and how we help and serve other people.
Precisely. And while you were saying that, I was writing down, but we're human. And I think a lot of that right now is just swept under the rug. It's like, you're this and you're that. And no, you're human.
Mm-hmm.
And I will often say, sit down and shut up and listen.
Mm-hmm. But that is not what our nightly news wants you to do. Our nightly news
they're dangerous. It's, to me, I look at their headlines and it's, this is propaganda. They're not fooling me none.
Yeah. And what's made it worse is that they figured out that there's riches in the niches. They figured out that if they appeal to the Republicans on one side or the Democrats on the other, that they'll be able to maintain a solid base. By the way, politicians figured that out a long time ago. But what that does is they then spend most of their time trying to terrify their base, either to terrify you about how Trump's going to light the whole world on fire if you're on the left, or if you're on the right, to convince you that they're going to try to stop you from being able to say your point of view, or they're going to light the world on fire, whatever. But the point is, what they're really trying to do is get you to watch tomorrow. That's their only real goal. If they can terrify you enough that you want to figure out what's going to happen, you'll turn on their channel tomorrow to see what the news is. So they create these stories that are long stories that continue to make you worry about where we're going. Breaking news used to be breaking news 30 years ago. Larry's better at this than I am, and maybe he can talk about why the change took place. But breaking news used to really be breaking news. Now breaking news happens every 15 seconds.
I remember seeing some time ago, and I've seen it more than once, when I think it was Walter Cronkite, when he announced that President Kennedy had died. That was breaking news. And every time I see it, I weep a bit. It's like, oh my God, you could tell he was heartbroken. That doesn't exist these days.
I think the whole country was. And I think I think one of my worries is that, like the two legislators that were shot, one woman who was a legislator.
Yeah. Michigan, wasn't it?
Yeah. And I'm not even going to mention who it was because I think it's unimportant, but one of the senators on the other side made a joke about it. And the answer to that is that, let's think about the human impacts first. We shouldn't be that divided. And the answer is, I think Larry's right. If you look at the numbers on this and you just do the math, somewhere around 70% of the public's registered to vote. Of the 70% that's registered, about a third are Democrat, a third are Republican, a third are independents. But if you go to the primary, only about 30% of them show up. Well, that ends up being about 8% of the country shows up in a Democratic primary, and about 8% show up in a Republican primary. By the way, those numbers are just as accurate as they can be. Well, I've polled them. I spent a lot of time polling them in politics because I've helped in multiple presidential races. I've been engaged in it for a long time. I can tell you that group of voters are disproportionately grievance voters. They're angry. And who they're generally angry at are people on the other side.
See, I did not know that.
Yeah, it's overwhelming. But the minute you leave the primary and you go to the other 80% of the voters, they're much more willing to listen and to work with people on the other side. So you'll see these polls, and the poll might say that 80% of Republicans polled say that they would be upset if their daughter married a Democrat. Or if you go to the other side and say 80% of Democrats say they'd be upset if their son married a Republican. But the point is this: who are they polling? Well, they're polling those voters who vote in a Democratic or Republican primary, and those who usually show up. And yeah, they're more grievance voters. Two things I would say. First is if you poll all of the voters, including independents and others that say, like whether or not she loves my son would matter more to me than what party they were in, right? The idea of what kind of education they have might matter more, or their ability to have a good job, or their ability to be a good mom or a dad. Those factors become more important. But when you get down to that very narrow base, that changes.
I have to ask you both, is critical thinking on the wane? Are we losing the ability to have critical thinking?
I think that's really a good question. I don't think we're losing the ability. The question is, can we prioritize in our brain what's important and what's unimportant? Is it important to post the next article on Facebook and the picture of your two cats versus
Hey,
is it
it's
more important
LinkedIn. I'm not on Facebook. It's LinkedIn.
how to make that personally? Or is it more important for us to have these conversations and try to figure out how do we get through them? We've proven over the centuries that we can do that, and I don't have any doubt we can do it today. But we can't delegate that to somebody else. We clearly can't delegate it to political leaders. I mean, they work for us. We don't work for them. They are public officials because of the public, not because they're officials. I have a lot of doctor friends, as does Paul, and they all think that we're patients vast majority of our life. We're a patient like 1% of our lives, and frankly, we are a voter 1% of our time. But we are inundated with voting issues or election issues or political issues, and it's unimportant in the short term, but it's very important in the long term. So you get back to individuals, back to power, and back to responsibility. The founders gave us rights and freedoms, but they gave us responsibilities. And we, the people, need to exercise those responsibilities. We've proven in the past we can, and I think fundamentally what our book is saying, there's so much more right about America than what's wrong with America. And don't listen to anybody tell you it's not working or it's broken or it was better 20 or 50 or 100 years ago, or it was all flawed from the beginning when the founders wrote it. No, the country was not invented and founded in 1619. It was founded 249 years ago. That's when it was founded, and everyone in America has those benefits. So folks, step up, take responsibility, engage, be involved, and expect that politicians who work for us all the time, we work for them 1% of the time, have higher expectations that they need to do a better job for us.
And what I would do on that question is I would kind of take it back to what the news does. But just for a moment, let's think about this. So is critical thinking in the decline? I would tell you it needs not to be. And the reason for it is we do have an AI revolution that's going on. And one of the results of the AI revolution will be that knowledge is going to become abundant. It's going to be everywhere. It's going to be easy to access. I don't know if like I said, I have 14 grandkids. I can't say anything anymore without them sitting down on their little phone and going, "Oh, actually, Grandpa, that's not true."
ChatGPT told me no.
15, Paul. 15 before you got count right.
Yeah, it's like, and I keep telling them, I spent my whole life gathering this information. You guys get it for free now in a few seconds. But in any event, so what do we do on AI? Well, we terrorize people. How do we terrorize them? We talk to them about all the jobs that are going to be lost, how terrible this is going to be, how there's going to be some robot that's going to control the world. I don't buy into any of it. I will admit to that. But why are you being sold that? Maybe there's some truth to it, but why are you being sold that? Well, you're being sold that because it makes you watch the news. It makes you stay engaged. You're going to be more likely to pay attention to it and to listen to it if that happens. So I met with a group of reporters a couple of years ago, And we were all talking. This was national reporters. I was in with a group of other people who were highly engaged. And I asked a question. Okay, so whose job is it to promote optimism in the United States, to make people believe that it's going to be okay? They go, well, Mayor, that's the politician's job.
No. Sorry, keep going.
No, I agree with you. That's Larry and I start our book on this very, very subject, right? When I was a little boy, I can recall running home as fast as I could to watch the Apollo moonshot where we were going to land on the moon. And I could tell you the name of every astronaut, their wives. I could tell you the name.
That was 1969.
That's right.
July 20th, 1969.
Yeah. And so, but the key was that it was such a powerful event. And when we got done watching it, we had this sense of what Americans can do. Now, here's what I find to be interesting is that many years later, I went home. I had to work on a spreadsheet a couple years ago. And I turned on CNN. And as I'm working on the spreadsheet, all I see on CNN is how Donald Trump's going to overthrow the United States and to put us into tyranny. So I turn on to Fox. All I see on Fox is all these immigrants coming across the border and how big the problem is. At 3:00, for just a few seconds, they had William Shatner come on. Right? William Shatner, for those of you who are old enough, you'd remember he was Captain Kirk back in Star Trek. He had actually been in a spaceship, paid for.
Bezos, the Bezos.
That's right.
Right. Okay.
There was no launch, no countdown. The America wasn't tied into it. Instead, we're watching all these things that would terrorize you. And yet, the private sector had just changed the trajectory of what we were doing in the new frontiers by the private sector paying for it. And later, Elon Musk has that wonderful picture where you can watch him actually capturing the space rocket as it comes back down to Earth. The point I'm giving to you is the harder part for us to do today, and this is more difficult, they're not going to automatically give you the things you should be optimistic about. You're going to have to spend some time thinking about it and working to get it. If you instead decide to watch the nightly news, you're going to get fed a lot of negativity. You turn on your social marketing, you're going to go down wormholes as you start looking up things that terrify you because they're going to feed you more of it because that'll put more ads in front of you. And yet, just look at the space race all by itself and recognize how big the change is. If you ask me, AI is going to change everything. But most of the things it's going to change are going to be dramatically for the better, extending human life, curing major diseases, helping us deal with problems that we could have never fixed in the past. There'll be some jobs lost. When we created a tractor and a combine, we lost lots of jobs in the United States, but they went on to other types of jobs that paid better and that were more creative.
You adapt and you create.
And to your point, critical thinking is going to increasingly become more important because knowledge is going to become more of a commodity.
I love that. And I was going to ask you, how America's spirit of innovation and reinvention shaped our country's success, but you just explained it before I could even ask. And I wanted to ask both of you, and this is more about generosity and civic engagement. Why do you think Americans are among the most charitable and civilly engaged? I think I'm saying that right. Engaged people in the world. And how does this, contribute to our national character? I think we're enormously generous.
We are enormously generous, and I think there's some different speculations as to what causes that. But we certainly, the interesting thing with the country focused on the power of individuals learned how to work together. So it wasn't like I'm just going to go on my little piece of property and I ain't going to talk to anybody else. In the Western days, you needed neighbors to help you build your fences, to raise your barns. You worked together to accomplish big things. And I think that part of that culture, with, America, the founding document is a moral document, and certainly all the founders were strongly religious people. So there's a foundation of the American religion that certainly underscores generosity. It's true with every religion in the world. Some of the bigger religions, but generosity is pretty important to the culture of America, and certainly pretty important to the moral fabric of America.
And-
Get
right.
speculate as to why, but
I-
I think that's what happens.
I think politicians make a mistake when they believe that we're not generous. The Americans are very proud of the Marshall Plan, the American Red Cross, the fact that when we invented the COVID vaccine, that we shared it with other people from around the world. I think that's a matter of American pride to know that that's who we are. And I personally feel good about it. What I would also, though, tell you is that there's been a benefit that's come back to us. We have one of the strongest militaries we have the strongest military by far in the world today, and one of the strongest in world history. Here's, though, part of why that happens. It's not just the technology and the people that work for it. It's because we have allies. We have more allies around the world than any other country ever has. We have more bases around the world than any other country has ever had. And those bases make it cheaper for us. Instead of having to have aircraft carriers, you have these cheap pieces of land that you can utilize. The reason that those have been given to us is because there's been this sense that America has helped share that. Now, that's not a statement that we shouldn't try to make certain that we're taking care of American interests. Certainly we should. But that idea of Americans being that group of people who would land people on the beaches of Normandy when maybe we didn't feel like it was our fight says to the rest of the world that's special. In fact, on that last story, I went to Normandy years ago, and there was a woman who was 80 years old. She was talking to me about when the troops had landed and what it was like. But the thing that she said to me, she said there are two things that really stood out to people there. That when the Nazis had taken over, she said the first group of Nazis weren't that bad, but she said when the SS came in, they were absolutely brutal to them. But she said the thing about Americans, when they took over, they marched through their city. She said the first thing was, she said she remembers how handsome the American soldiers were. The second thing she remembers, she said, anybody who tells you the Swiss have the best chocolate, she said that Hershey's chocolate far and away is the best chocolate, because some soldier gave her a Hershey's bar when she was like 6 years old or 7 years old. She had a picture of it. But she said, here's the part that shocked us. You guys took it over, and then you gave it back to us. You just gave it back. That's who we are. I'm proud of that. That's a part of our legacy that we should hold on to and to recognize that our generosity and our courage mixed together has been a big part of making this the most special nation, and the nation that's done more to promote human progress than any other nation in the history of the planet.
And if you want to look at the good of people who will just step up and do what needs to be done without being asked, they just show up. The Amish, Hurricane Helena. I love to watch them. They are amazing people.
Absolutely. And Americans came from all around the country, not because they were expected or they were bought. They volunteered to help in Katrina and many other disasters. People just hit the road and help others all the time. That is somewhat unusual for people to go across their country to another part to help others. It's typical in America.
It is. I am equidistant literally between hurricanes and Rita and Katrina. I got clobbered by both of them. There came a point, because I was volunteering, I was working towards getting water and for infant formula and ice to the only remaining hospital in New Orleans that was still functioning. And we had to actually at one point say, stop coming. We don't have any place to put you. We'll let you know when we need you. I mean, it was overwhelming how people just jumped in and helped.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I met a couple in New Orleans that they owned a book store, and you may already know the story, but I went into their little bookstore and they had the little talk about it, and it was just so amazing to have them say that when they had to open back up the services, they were only going to open up the emergency services, and they created an argument that books were an emergency service.
They are.
They let them come in and they opened back up their store and they gave away books for free and told people they could bring them back because there wasn't any money at the time. But yeah, it's those types of stories, they're not just heroic. They're what it's all part of the human experience that makes it so special. And I think America does more to foster that than any other country in the history of the planet. This idea of collectivism versus individualism, which is kind of the story of our book. If you're a relativist, you believe, hey, there's, the collectivists, they're just as good. There's just a different way of looking at it. And their views they may not be the same as ours, but we shouldn't see them as any better, any less. Well, of course, that idea of collectivism in China or Russia, the Soviet Union or Maoism, what they said was, hey, it's okay if you kill 20 or 40 million people because you have a collective interest that you have to take care of. In the United States, we say, no, that's not ever okay. That's not okay. That doesn't mean we haven't made mistakes. I won't take away from that. But we oftentimes are the first one to condemn our own mistakes. The idea is that we have universal values. And I believe in them. I believe that there are some values that are universal. The idea that all men are created equal, endowed upon by their creator with certain inalienable rights. To me, it should be a universal value. And it's not about, we don't say in that Americans are. We say all mankind. Now that's evolved. I mean, again, it was probably white men who owned property in the beginning, and then it became white men, and then it became all men, and then it became men and women, and then it became other people, including different sexual orientations. But those rights being extended to more people not only made us a more righteous society, it also created more buyers and sellers, more people who were engaged in the economy, more people who were producing goods. Overwhelmingly, this is a very powerful concept to engage individuals. Now, where the left makes a mistake is they oftentimes think that somebody owning that property, making a profit, being able to produce goods, they sometimes see that as not being the rightful thing. Well, it's every bit as much an individual right to be able to have private property rights, to own what you create, free markets, free enterprise. Those are all items that say, let's start with the core of this being the individual and build up. And it's through that we've created the most prosperous nation ever.
I know. Gentlemen, we have to wrap up. We're out of time, and I hate this. In fact, I would love for you to come back if you feel it, because I think there's so much more to share in this book. But I know you need to get off to your 4th of July endeavors, and I do too. So, Paul, Larry, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience? And where can people find you or learn more about your book?
Well, I'll start and then Paul can wrap up. I think it's important to underscore the book says what's right with America is so much more right than is wrong. So much more right than is wrong. And we have faced so many crises in America, and I think we're in one now, and it's a fiscal crisis. But from civil wars to world wars to depressions, Americans rose up, reimagined, and fixed and solved problems, and we'll do it again.
Yeah, and I would just say that the fundamental key to that is not just understanding the role that our government has played, but that how it's empowered us. And the empowerment that we've been given means that we all have a role to play, that we all have to hold our own accountability. Most importantly, to recognize that when we're more open to listening and being a part of other people's ideas, not only does our society do better, but we do better as individuals. And that, to me, is why you celebrate the 4th of July.
And thank you both. I mean, this is the perfect occasion to reflect on the strength and the promise of America. And like I say, I have read that book 3 times. I'll read it another 3 or 4 times. Every time I open it, I have sticky notes all over it. You ought to see it. It's fat. But I always find something like, ooh, and let me go back and read that again. It's an amazing book. And I really encourage our audience to get it. It is What's Right with America and How We Can Keep It That Way, and it's available on Amazon. So before I let you go reluctantly, is there anything else you'd like to share?
No, except that you have a great podcast, and it's fun to be on here. And I love that stiletto shoe story that you told us.
That's true. That's a true story. I am a nerd. I do have stilettos. Just
And I would just say, Denise, thanks for having us, and thanks to your audience for listening
oh, it is my
and believing
pleasure.
in America.
Oh, yeah. Listen, I was born and raised believing in America. And I have to say this because I wrote it down a couple of times. I don't understand why people think it's an experiment. It's not. That's my opinion. So I'll get the last word in there. So listen, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. Paul Johnson and Larry Aldrich wrote, What's Right with America? Right is all capital letters. What's Right with America and How We Can Keep It That Way, to offer a counterpoint to the often very negative and divisive narrative seen in the news and in political discourse. They argue that despite the challenges and the divisions facing the country, America's greatest days are still ahead. And their goal is to remind readers that the nation's true strength lies in its founding principles: freedom, individual empowerment, justice, and the resilient spirit of its people. And they highlight 5 defining characteristics that have propelled the United States to greatness, showing how these ideals can help guide the nation through current and future challenges. And the book is meant to inspire optimism, uphold founding ideals. I can't talk now. My hour just ran out. My brain just quit down. And encourage every citizen to believe and contribute to a brighter American future. So be sure to find Paul Johnson and Larry Aldrich online. Go to Amazon, get their book, and don't forget to order What's Right with America and How We Can Keep It That Way on Amazon. Gentlemen, thank you. Happy Independence Day. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Get your voice heard. If you would like to launch your own far-reaching podcast, contact Denise Griffitts at yourofficeontheweb.com and go to the podcast tab.